Slide text, HUD Office of Housing Counseling. Next Steps for Homeownership Initiative Grantees Webinar. October 15, 2024. Logos, Department of Housing and Urban Development. Office of Housing Counseling. In an image on the slide, a boy and girl walk in front of a man and woman, carrying moving boxes into a home. A woman appears in a video call tile in their upper right corner of the slide. She is labeled, Lindsay Burns, ICF.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our HUD Office of Housing Counseling Next Steps for Homeownership Initiative Grantees webinar. Today is Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. I'm Lindsay Burns, Lead Housing Counseling Specialist with ICF. Before we get started, we'd like to cover just a few logistics items.
The next slide shows a screenshot of the chat box, which says, Webinar Chat at the top. Text at the bottom of the box says, Who can see your messages? A red box surrounds the text, Hosts and Panelists, in a field. Text, your text can only be seen by panelists. The slide also shows a Q&A box, which says, Question and Answer at the top. Text in the center says, Welcome to Q&A. Questions you ask will show up here. Only host and panelists will be able to see all questions. A red box surrounds a field at the bottom of the Q&A box, which reads, Type your question here. An unchecked box reads, Send anonymously.
In this webinar, you'll be using Zoom. There are a few features in Zoom available for you to participate. You are all in the webinar in listen-only mode. You can use the chat box to submit any technical issues to the host, and we will do our best to assist you live during the webinar. And please use the Q&A box to submit any content-related questions. After the webinar, at any point in time, you can also send questions to housing.counseling@hud.gov. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording, transcript, and slides in about 7 to 10 days on the HUD Exchange. The link to the HUD Exchange is https://www.hudexchange.info/programs/housing-counseling/webinars/. When you are in the HUD Exchange, logged into the HUD Exchange, you can click the Get Credit button on the training page to add the course to your transcript. Again, you must be logged into the HUD Exchange to be able to access the Get Credit button through your HUD Exchange account. The presentation materials, which you'll be seeing today, were also sent via email prior to the webinar, along with a template that will be discussed.
The next slide shows an image of a smartphone, open to Menti.com. The web page on the phone says, Mentimeter, then has a field under the text, Please enter the code. The number pad is open on the phone keyboard. In the bottom right corner of the slide, a circular navy blue icon with a bar graph inside sits below the text, Time for Mentimeter. In
addition to the presentation content for today's webinar, we have a few questions for you that we will be engaging through Mentimeter. When you see this icon, Time for Mentimeter, which is a round icon with a little bar graph in it, and you're prompted by the icon, you can visit www.menti.com and you can enter the code that will be provided using your computer or smartphone. And at this point, I will transition over to Mentimeter for our first question for you all.
On the Mentimeter page, a QR code sits in the bottom left corner. A picture of the White House with red trim sits toward the right side. Text, Next Steps for HI Grantees Webinar.
Can you see again, the code for Mentimeter is 72679652. If you join us at menti.com, you can also use the QR code on your screen if you'd like to use your mobile device to scroll and access Menti. Give folks a moment to log in. I see folks are joining us.
Green and blue thumbs up icons float up from the bottom right corner of the page, where a counter shows the number of thumbs up, increasing to 11.
Great. The link and the code were also posted in the chat if you'd like to follow the link to menti.com as well. Great. I will start with our first question now that we have a good number of folks logged in.
The thumbs up counter reads 14.
Our first question for you all before we dive into the presentation from the HUD team is, once your grant has been executed, are you ready to begin submitting completed units for payment? You can select yes. You can select we are working on it and will bill soon, or you can select unsure, we need more guidance. This is just a pulse check for us to get a handle on where everyone stands with regard to their homeownership initiative grant.
Bars representing the number of responses for the 3 answer choices grow and shrink as more people respond.
As your responses are coming in, it looks like we've got relatively even distribution across the board. A number of folks are saying we are working on it and will bill soon. We have 11 responses in that middle category, but a good number of you, 9 so far, have shared that you're unsure and you need more guidance on how to bill for this new grant. A number of you as well, 7 folks who have chimed in so far, 8, the number is going up, have said yes, we are ready to begin submitting completed units for payment once our grant has been executed. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into getting the grant executed and off the ground, so it helps, and we appreciate your participation and as we ramp up for this new program. That question will be open for a moment, and we'll come back to Menti again at the end of the presentation. But with that information available to us, I will transition back over to our content today, and we'll introduce Melissa Noe, Housing Program Specialist at the Office of Policy and Grant Administration in the Office of Housing Counseling, to provide an introduction.
Text, Introduction. Melissa Noe, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration. Lindsay's video call tile disappears.
Hi, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Melissa Noe. I'm a housing program specialist within HUD's Office of Policy and Grant Administration in the Office of Housing Counseling. Today, we're going to discuss the following. First, we're going to discuss the period of performance for this grant. Then we'll move to subcontracts and subgrants. We'll discuss payment requests and how to complete a final report, and documentation of unit completion and burden of proof, defaults and remedies, HUD oversight. We'll end with HUD resources for you, and we'll have time at the end to answer questions.
Text, Period of Performance, Article 3. Raisa Waheed, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration.
I'm going to pass it now to Raisa Waheed, who is a Housing Program Specialist in the Office of Policy and Grant Administration. She will discuss the period of performance, which is Article 3 of your Homeownership Initiative Grant Agreement.
Thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Raisa Waheed, and today I'll speak to you about the period of performance with this Homeownership Initiative Grant. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the period of performance for this award began on October 1, 2023, and is set to expire on March 31st, 2025. That's an 18-month grant. And during this period of performance, what you submit and what will be reviewed is the unit of completion and or unit which will be considered complete within the period of performance. And that's the only thing that could be charged to the grant. The only exception of a unit being reviewed outside of this period of performance is if HUD allows for an extension for the award period. Next slide, please. And extensions have to meet certain criteria to be allowed, and that's what I'm going to speak to now. So the extension, first of all, has to be authorized by HUD. It's not something that you can avail yourselves to without HUD authorizations. And the extension can only be and will only be granted for cause, meaning your extension cannot exceed a total of 12 months from the original end date, which again is March 31st, 2025. And you must request an extension in writing no later than 10 days prior to the expiration of that March 31st date. Next slide, please. And to request an extension, we will require you to provide a justification for the extension and the need for it, and how you propose to spend the funds within that specific time frame. Please keep in mind, as with all other grants, that extensions will not be approved simply to use unobligated funds. Next slide, please.
Text, Subcontracts and Subawards, Article 5. Kate Kerrigan, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration.
And now I'll pass on the presentation to Kate Kerrigan. Thank you.
Kate appears in a video call tile in the upper right.
Great. Thanks, Raisa. My name is Kate Kerrigan. I'm a Housing Program Specialist in the Office of Policy and Grant Administration with the Office of Housing Counseling. Today I'm going to cover subcontracts and subawards, which is Article 5 of the grant agreement.
Text, Subcontracts and Subgrants. It is not permissible to contract out housing counseling services, except as specified in 24 CFR 214.103, I. If this exception to the general prohibition applies, grantee shall comply with 2 CFR 200 and all other requirements. Exceptions apply if subgrant, etc., was described and approved HINOFO application, and funded in grant or otherwise approved by HUD, is for web-based education, is for the purchase of supplies, materials, etc.
Just a reminder in this first slide that in general, housing counseling services cannot be contracted out. There are exceptions in the CFR for subgrants approved in the HINOFO application and funded in the grant. Also exceptions for web-based education and for the purchase of supplies. When these exceptions exist, grantees must still comply with 2 CFR 200 and all other requirements. Amendments to the Homeownership Initiative Statement of Work. If a grantee wants to make any changes to their subgrantees, branches, or their subgrantee allocations, they must obtain written approval to amend the statement of work at least 15 days prior to the requested change. And this is in accordance with Article 4 of the grant agreement. HUD may also reduce an award if the grantee's approved changes to the statement of work result in activities not being carried out according to the terms of the award. Funding agreements. Before grantees distribute any funds to subgrantees, a grantee must execute a subgrant agreement, which is also activity 14 of the statement of work. These agreements must delineate responsibilities for program management, including timeframes for reporting to HUD and all other relevant provisions of the grant agreement. This includes, but is not limited to, requirements of performance of all unit components as specified in Article 7 and Article 9 of the grant agreement. More about funding agreements. State, local, or federally recognized tribal governments must also include any clauses required by HUD in their subgrantee agreements. Grantee funding agreements with affiliates for the direct provision of counseling must make clear that the recipient organization is a subgrantee and not a subcontractor. Responsibility for grant administration. Grantees are responsible for their subgrantees' compliance with the grant agreement and applicable laws. Grantees must monitor the performance of subgrantees and take appropriate action to resolve any problems to ensure compliance. Grantees must also have a quality control plan that outlines how subgrantee performance is monitored. This plan must be provided to HUD upon request. Subgrants and allocations of funds. Grantees must maintain copies of all their subgrant agreements, and grantees must maintain documentation about how funds are distributed to subgrantees or how funds are allocated to branches. A grantee's subgrant agreements and records must be made available to HUD and the subgrantees. Other subgrantee requirements. Activity number 13 in the statement of work is the post-purchase counseling follow-up plan. Grantees must review all subgrant or branch post-purchase follow-up plans for this grant. The follow-up plans must, at a minimum, meet the requirements outlined in the Housing Counseling Handbook, and these plans must also be made available to HUD to review upon request.
Text, Payment Requests and Reporting, Article 4 and Article 8. Gabriella Roman, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration.
I will now pass it over to my colleague, Gabriella Roman.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I know it is morning in some places, so good morning to you as well. My name is Gabriela Roman. I am the Housing Program Specialist with the Office of Policy and Grant Administration at OHC. So I'm going to talk about the grant amounts. The grantee shall be reimbursed according to the terms of their executed grant agreement. This includes the statement of work, the HUD 1044, and 2 CFR 200.201B. HUD reserves the right to adjust the amount as the grant amount as part of the unit rate and unit projections negotiations. The exact amount of funds on the HUD 1044 is provided to the grantee upon the completion of the negotiations. And I know some of you already completed your negotiations, so congratulations. Next slide, please. So per unit, the grantee will be reimbursed per unit that is completed at the approved rates, unit rate specified in the Homeownership Initiative Statement of Work, as I mentioned, after it is negotiated upon. And the unit rate is valid for the period of performance indicated in the grant agreement.
Text, cost of managing a network.
Grantees may charge HUD for the cost of managing a network. Grantees will be awarded up to 15% of their network's total subaward amounts to cover aggregate costs, including direct and indirect costs of managing the network of subgrantees. Activities may include oversight, compliance, and quality control. The final percentage will be listed in the statement of work. In each grant activity report, the grantee is allowed to draw down no more than 15% of the reimbursement for their network's completed units as a cost for managing their network. So if you submit multiple reports, you will request 15% of your total completed cost. If you submit one report, it will all, you can submit for everything at once. It's all based on number of completed units. Let's talk about the modifications to the Homeownership Initiative Statement of Work. It's very important to discuss any modifications or deviations from the Statement of Work or the grant agreement. Modifications must be made by mutual consent of parties and by the issuance of written modifications signed and dated by all properly authorized signatory officials. And this must be done prior to any changes being performed. As previously mentioned, requests for modifications should be made in writing at least 15 days prior to the implementation of the requested change. Modifications include, but not limited to, reallocating funds among subgrantees. HUD is not obligated to fund any changes not properly approved in advance. And you know, I want to emphasize this bullet point. So please make sure that you speak with your POC ahead of time if you want to make any changes. Requests for prior approval must be made in accordance with 2 CFR 200.201B and 200.308. So let's talk about the grant activity reports. One of the good things that was mentioned earlier is that we have a GAR template. It's an Excel format that can be filled by the grantees. If you haven't received it yet, it will be going to you shortly. So no need for you to create your own report formats. GAR Excel template was created to make sure that everything that we want is included. Obviously, it's not a requirement, but it is highly recommended because it will make your job easier and it will make our job easier. So if you haven't received it, it will be shortcoming. So GAR activity reports are due no more than quarterly in accordance with the requirements listed in the statement of work. And so the dates are listed in your grant agreement, but I know a lot of you were waiting for today to make sure that you get all the information. So hopefully you will start submitting all your reports after you get this information. So also provide a list of funded subgrantees, branches, balances, reimbursement amounts, cumulative drawdowns, approved unit rates, approved units, and units completed.
Text, SOW number 15.
This will be in the GAR Excel template that we're going to provide, and submit the total to the reimbursed to be reimbursed for the cost of managing a network. That's item number 16 on your statement of work.
Text, submit the home purchase and mortgage origination data, SOW number 17. The slide displays a partial portion of a table, where the left-hand cell reads, 17. Home purchase and mortgage origination data template, and the right-hand cell reads, no more than quarterly. The center cell displays part of a long list. It reads, submit the following data for each household counseled, for which the grantee is requesting reimbursement: GAR period start date, GAR period end date, grant number, counseling agency HCS ID, counseling agency name, counselor name, counselor ID, client/household ID, race, based on HUD 9902 fields, ethnicity, based on HUD 9902 fields, limited English proficiency status, based on HUD 9902 fields, area median income, based on HUD 9902 fields, zip code prior to home purchase, zip code after home purchase, property zip code, credit score at start of counseling, credit score at end of counseling, loan close date, first-time home buyer, yes/no, lender name, lender street address, lender city, lender state, lender zip code, purchase price, $, loan amount, $, loan type, FHA, Virginia conventional, etc., loan term, in years.
So as part of your GAR, you're required to submit home purchase and home origination data, which is activity number 17 and item of work. There's in the slide, there's an extensive list of home purchase and mortgage information origination data. It's quite a good list. We ask not only that you review this list, but good practice would be to share among your counselors who will be gathering all the information for reporting to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Next slide.
Text, grant activity reports, CONT. Also submit, GAR certification, SOW number 18. Certification language can be found in Article 8B of the Grant Agreement, SF 425, SOW number 19, HUD 9902, SOW number 20. Update the data to reflect counseling activity funded through this grant. Form HUD 50090 HCA payment voucher, SOW number 21, once you have received the proof to submit from your HUD POC. Payment for completed units must be reported under budget line item 9530, HC Homeownership Grant.
Besides what I've already mentioned, you also have to submit the GAR certification. We have provided specific language for this GAR and activity number 18. And please note that this language is for this agreement. It's in Article 8B of the grant agreement. Please use it word for word without making any modifications. You also have to submit the SF 425, which is activity number 19. Also, HUD 9902 activity 20, you have to submit your 9902, update data to reflect the counseling activity funded through this grant. And all of you are grantees in good standing. So you know the deadlines are quarterly deadlines for the 9902s. And they have to be cumulative reporting data. You have to also submit HUD form 50090-CHC-A, which is the payment voucher. And that's once you have received approval from your POC that your GAR is has been reviewed and approved, you can submit your voucher for payment. And payment will be for the completed units based on your report, and it would be in budget line item 9530 of the CHC home ownership grant. Next slide, please.
Text, Final Report, Article 8. Elizabeth Dunn, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration.
So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Dunn, also from the house, also housing program specialist with the Office of Policy and Grant Administration, to talk about the final report.
Thanks so much, Gabriella. I'll be talking about the final report. My name is Elizabeth, and I will be talking about the final report, the documentation of unit completion, and finally the burden of proof. So a final report must be submitted in accordance with the statement of work no more than 120 calendar days after the period of performance has ended. And the final report includes these three components. The grant activity report, which is the statement of work activity number 22. Submit all required documentation listed in the GAR section that Gabriella just covered. Final narratives, which is the statement of work activity number 23. And finally, the closeout certification, which is the statement of work activity number 24. So now we're going to break down the statement of work activity 23 in the middle, the final narrative, and talk about what needs to be included in that final narrative. So in that final narrative, there's questions that you as the grantee will need to respond to. What might you do different were you to receive grant funds for a second year? How should HUD refine this program? We're always looking for feedback and how we can make it better for the clients, for the agencies, and for HUD. What challenges did you have that led to delays or the inability to expend the grant funds if applicable? How effectively did you serve your target populations? How did this grant's fixed amount, this is different, this is new, this is a fixed amount award, influence, if at all, how effectively you were able to serve the target populations? And then what was your experience in implementing the fixed award, the fixed amount award reimbursement model? And there's more. Next slide. Compared to CHC cost reimbursement grant, did you find the fixed award amount to be easier or harder to implement, and why? Were you able to provide the post-purchase counseling to all reimbursed units? If not, let us know what kind of challenges you encountered. What post-purchase counseling topics were discussed with the new home buyers? This is data that HUD needs to collect. And finally, would your agency reapply for this type of program if it were offered again? Why and why not? Consider adding the GAR and final report to program requirements and leave out closeout certification either as its own end of grant activity or add it to the above section for final administration requirement. This is the feedback we need from you in order to make the HUD programs better. So now let's talk about what needs to be included in the final report. There are 3 additional components that need to be that are required in the final report. Submit a written certification signed by the authorized official, which states that all closeout activities per 2 CFR 200, 344, and 345 have been completed. The grantee must also certify in writing that the project was completed as agreed to in the federal reward, or identify those activities that were not completed, and that all expenditures were incurred in accordance with 2 CFR 200-403. And finally, the submission of this final report is due no more than 120 days after the end of the period of performance. Another section we want to bring up is documentation of unit completion and burden of proof, which is Article 9 of the grant agreement. Next slide.
Documentation of unit completion. The following source documentation is required to be in the household's counseling files for each unit for which the grantee is requesting payment.
There are 3 components involved with documenting unit completion. There is the pre-purchase counseling component. All activity logs for all pre-purchase counseling sessions that make up a unit. Those need to be recorded. Home purchase and mortgage origination component. HUD will need to see evidence of home purchase or mortgage origination. In other words, the deed, the title transfer, closing disclosure, etc. And all data fields listed in the home purchase and mortgage origination data template in the Homeownership Initiative Statement of Work. And finally, there's a post-purchase counseling component. Activity logs for all post-purchase counseling session for the unit or document of disclosure signed by the participating household and certified housing counselor that post-purchase is required and will be completed 6 to 12 months after home purchase and mortgage origination. Please remember, for documentation of unit completion, all information required to document expenses that are charged to the grant must be made available to HUD upon request and maintained for a period of at least 3 years after the expiration of the grant period or date of last payment, whichever occurs first. Now, finally, we're going to talk about burden of proof, which is a section in Article 9 of the grant agreement. Always remember, it has to be document. The burden of proof for units completed rests with the grantee. All supporting records of completed units are subject to inspection and audit by HUD at any time and after the expiration of the period of performance. Important to note, improper or inadequate documented performance for the substantiation of unit completion may result in payment being disallowed and subject to repayment using non-federal funds or an offset to current or future grant funds. So again, document. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dita McCarthy, to discuss defaults and remedies. Dita?
Defaults and remedies, Article 12. Dita McCarthy, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration. Dita appears in a video call tile in the upper right.
Hello, everybody. This is Dita McCarthy, and I am also with OPGA and a Housing Program Specialist. So I'm going to talk about the different kinds of default. Now, under your grant agreement in Article 2, there are 6 different types of events of default. 5 of these will probably be very familiar to you if you read your grant agreement from any past such grants, nonprofit HUD grants or CHC grants. But one of them is particular to the fixed award amount. And so fixed amount award, sorry. So I'm going to be talking about those. So there are 6, as I said, and then they break down into 2 different, they have 2 different types of remedies, which we'll talk about. So the first one is a material failure. Well, wait a minute. First, let me define what an event of default is. I think that's the most important thing. An event of default is a grantee's legal failure to fulfill an obligation under the grant agreement. Okay, a legal failure to fulfill an obligation. So the first one is a material failure to comply with the terms and conditions of a grant agreement. Now, of course, terms and conditions are very, very broad. There could be a number of factors, and you might need more information. So for that reason, even though it is an event of default, the HUD-POC must give the grantee written notice of the occurrence of the event of default and a reasonable opportunity to take corrective action. So we can't just take back the money or, close the grant. There has to be notice and opportunity to correct. Number 2 is the failure to complete the grant activities in accordance with the federal award. Now, this one is a different type. With the failure to complete grant activities in accordance with the award, HUD may recapture unexpended funds without additional notice to the grantee. However, please note the word may. The government we have a word language that says we may do something, but it doesn't mean we will. So in this one, you would also probably receive notice. There would be a notice that something's been happening. Number 3 is use of grant funds in a manner that constitutes a material violation of applicable statutes and regulations or the grant agreement. So in this one also, so number 2 and number 3, HUD may recapture unexpended funds without additional notice. However, I want to go back real quickly to number 2 and note that number 2 is the one that you would probably not have seen before, because this is particular to a fixed amount award. When you execute your grant, you've negotiated your units, number of units, unit rates, and so on. So those are what the grant activities that were in accordance with the award, what the condition was, that these things be completed. And if they aren't, then the remaining money may be recaptured. And the third one, material violation, where is, use of grant funds in a manner that constitutes material violation, even though we're trying to say, so you have an agreement as far as your unit rate, you have an agreement to the number. So it's less applicable than in a cost reimbursement award, but it can still happen. For example, yes, you've completed your units, right? All your units, and at the unit rate and been reimbursed. However, a grantee could technically complete all the grant requirements, but however be violating some other policy, such as a conflict of interest policy in calculating the rate or in dispersing the funds. And so that could constitute a misuse of grant funds. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, to number 4. So yes, thank you. So it was slow. So the number 4 is a failure to execute the grant before the end of the period of performance, or a failure to submit a drawdown request for all remaining funds within 120 days following the end of the period of performance. This is the third one, where HUD may recapture unexpended funds without additional notice to the grantee. Number 5, failure to maintain HUD-approved status during the term of this agreement. In this one, HUD shall give the grantee written notice of the occurrence of this event of default and a reasonable opportunity to take corrective action. And number 6, misrepresentation in the grantee's HINOFO application that, if known by HUD, would have resulted in the grant not being awarded. This one too, as well, HUD shall give the grantee written notice of the occurrence of the event of default and an opportunity to take corrective action. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in notice of default, just to recap what we've just discussed, number 1, 5, and 6, HUD is required to provide the grantee written notice of the alleged event of default and a reasonable opportunity to correct the matter. And number 2, 3, and 4, HUD is not required to do so. Next slide, please.
Text, HUD Oversight, Article 21F. Dita McCarthy, Housing Program Specialist, Office of Policy and Grant Administration.
So in HUD Oversight, very briefly, that's Article 21F. Next slide.
Text, HUD Oversight.
Grantee and all sub-grantees must cooperate with all HUD oversight activities, requests for access to facilities, requests for access to agencies' CMS systems, and requests for information, including, but not limited to, complete household counseling files and client-level data. And at this point, remember, just go back a second. You need to maintain those housing counseling files because that's proof of that the activities that you were reimbursed for did occur. We will be looking at that. And now, am I supposed to turn it over to Lindsay for a quick Mentimeter, or shall I go ahead and go to resources? Lindsay, did you have a Mentimeter or you want to wait?
Lindsay reappears. A resource slide has the Time for Mentimeter icon in the lower right. The slide reads, find us at www.hudexchange.info/counseling. Email us at housing.counseling@hud.gov. Grant and award information, www.hudexchange.info/programs. Also housing-counseling/HINOFO/. Counselor training and testing website, www.hudhousingcounselors.com/. Housing counseling today, www.hudexchange.info/programs/housing-counseling/housing-counseling-today/.
I will go over the resources in the Mentimeter. Thank you, Dita.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And now we know you all may have lots of questions, and we have an opportunity to start to submit your questions in the chat. So while we give you a chance to type in your questions, we wanted to share some of the resources that are available for you to reference after this webinar. I did mention at the beginning, the materials will be shared with you. You can also always find us at https://www.hudexchange.info/counseling. You can email the Office of Housing Counseling at housing.counseling@hud.gov. You can also find information on the grant and awards on the HUD Exchange under the Housing Counseling HINOFO site. And you can always visit the Counselor Training and Testing website at www.hudhousingcounselors.com. We also wanted to recommend that you stay tuned to Housing Counseling Today, which can be accessed via the HUD Exchange as well, where we often post content and information relevant to your day-to-day work. So as you're asking your questions about the Homeownership Initiative Grantees webinar, I will switch back over to Mentimeter to get a handle on the content that you've viewed today as you ask your questions.
The Mentimeter page reads, join at menti.com. Use code 726796552. What training/DA/resources do you need to be successful with your HI grant? Colored thumbs up icons float up from the bottom right corner.
You can use the same code or pull up Mentimeter just as you have before. And we're asking you for any additional training, TA, or resources that you might need to be successful with your Homeownership Initiative grant. We'll keep this open so folks can respond. The Menti link has also been posted again in the chat. And you can also post any of your immediate questions in the Q&A box, and the HUD team will take a moment to review those questions and develop some responses. So I'll give folks a minute to provide their input on what training, TA resources you might need in addition to today's webinar to be successful with your Homeownership Initiative grant. We have one example that's been provided of reporting templates, and we're happy to share that the materials circulated before this webinar did include a copy of the grant activity reporting template that HUD has created for your use. More information can certainly be provided on the reporting templates.
Responses begin to populate the page. Other responses say, understanding the GAR template, none, and compliance support and oversight tools. Because the burden of proof will be on the grantee, we would like to share a client file checklist with sub-grantees.
And folks are also asking about compliance support and oversight tools. Because the burden of proof will be on the grantee, they would like to share a client file checklist with sub-grantees, obviously of concern for the primary grantees.
Another group of responses says, reporting templates and sample forms or detailed instructions, GAR template, webinar on data capturing and reporting template, ability to incentivize post-purchase counseling, deal regarding the unit formulas created, understand compliance and burden of proof, and reporting due date.
There's some additional requests for support on the reporting templates, on data reporting and capture, and reporting due dates, as well as compliance and burden of proof. So we're taking all of this into consideration with the OPGA team today on today's webinar.
More responses say, best examples of post-purchase counseling plans, a webinar focused on 9902, data management and data templates, more information on 3 components requirements, ideas to get clients to return for post-purchase counseling, sample statement for follow-up post-purchase counseling that sub-grantee and clients can sign, report templates, sample report, and formula for determining cost of counseling, unit rate cost.
And we'll keep this open for the remainder of the webinar for folks to continue to provide their feedback. Melissa, should I turn it back over to you for any questions that have come in that you'd like to address?
A new response says, templates for a report.
Yes, thanks, Lindsay. Thanks everyone for all of the good suggestions in the Mentimeter currently. We did send out a report template today, like Lindsay and Gabriella both mentioned. The template is in Excel. We're not requiring grantees to use it. If we did that, we would have to go through a whole Paperwork Reduction Act process, which takes a long time.
A new response says, best practices checklist. Another says, formula for determining cost of counseling, unit rate cost.
But we are suggesting you to use it or to modify it in the way that works best for your network participating in this grant. If you'd like to. The template itself has, I think, 3 or 4 tabs on it, and it's got everything from basic GAR information we need, like your grant number and listing out the sub-grantees that will be participating and their HCS IDs, things like that, to being able to use one of the tabs to fill in information responses for your final report. So we hope that helps. We didn't want to, put too many like formulas in it and things like that for you all, since there could be a lot of modifying you do on your end. But it will, we hope that helps you when it comes to being able to report the data for this grant, because we know it is a lot different than what you are used to reporting for the comprehensive housing counseling grant.
New responses say, webinar on HI data reporting and how it interfaces with the CHC grant. We understand that there should not be duplicate billing for clients served. Future webinar on using the cost per client formula that HUD suggested, and burden of proof for post-purchase counseling completed, if completed after the POP ends.
Yes, that's a good comment from Jennifer. Can you scroll up, Lindsay, so we can see a few more of the... Yeah, great.
Jennifer scrolls up the page to the first group of responses.
I like the suggestion about technical assistance regarding the unit formulas created. What we're seeing with that, to touch on that, even though I know we didn't touch on that topic at all during this presentation, is that the formula and the kind of the approach that you all are taking to calculate out your unit rate is different based on the size of your network, the compilation of costs that are that you want to include in the rate, things like that. But I'm hoping that in the future, after this first year of the grant, we will be able to provide a lot more guidance on that. It's been a learning experience, and I know it's a complicated process for you all, since you have agencies that are sitting in different states and have different service models and number of clients that you're seeing. So we hope that we'll be able to gather a lot of information about that after this first year of the grant. I saw something about a compliance. Can you scroll up a little bit? There was one about, yeah, compliance support and oversight tools. Because the burden of proof will be on the grantee, exactly, that we talked about that. We would like to share a client file checklist with sub-grantees. I would suggest for that, we don't have anything for you today on that, you take everything that is in that, in the statement of work, when we're in the section about grant activity reporting, right? What needs to be reported to us when you're billing for the unit. So that's exactly like what was discussed, the home purchase and mortgage origination data. That's a lot of stuff there. But then the section of the grant agreement that outlines what would need to be in the client file. So on top of what is required for a grant activity report, when we're doing performance reviews, what we would be looking at in a client file for a client who completed the unit and was a unit for this grant in which you guys were reimbursed, you would want to look in it's section 9, payment requests, and then section C, documentation of unit component completion. There you'll see everything broken out by the different units. So again, for pre-purchase counseling, what we're requiring is just seeing activity logs for that pre-purchase counseling, exactly what you do already for pre-purchase counseling for comprehensive housing counseling. And then for the actual purchase and the mortgage origination, it would be twofold. It's the evidence of a home purchase or mortgage origination. So that could be a deed, title transfer, closing disclosure. Those are examples there. But something that that you can document in the file that there was a home purchase and a mortgage which originated and started for that home. And then finally for the post-purchase counseling component, again, it would just be the activity logs for the post-purchase counseling that was provided. Or if you are, or if you've got the certification that the household and the counselor both sign that post-purchase counseling will occur within 6 to 12 months after home purchase, that would be proof too. So we know that that's different than the actual post-purchase counseling log, activity log. But there's, a lot of circumstances that you all are very well, versed to, where a client buys a home and you do the proper follow-up with that client and they don't come back, right? Because they're very busy working out stuff with their new house. And so when you start the counseling, it was a good time to have them sign that certification, the counselor and the client, saying that they will come back for the post-purchase counseling. But again, we all understand that sometimes they just won't come back. And so as long as you follow, at a minimum, HUD's follow-up policy in the handbook, when you document that you've reached out to them within the timeframes that's required within the handbook, and we see that certification that they signed, that's okay on our end, because we know it can be difficult sometimes for them to come back. Okay, I'm going to turn now and look at what we had in questions. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at some stuff. And okay, so one question that I'm seeing is jumping out at me is, when will we hear about our final approved rate? So the process is right now is that once that rate has been approved by the financial contractor, we're getting that notification and then sending to your HUD-POC your 1044 that will need to be signed and what we're calling the statement of work attachment. And then attachment form has everything on it that was agreed upon when the rate was being reviewed. And so we'll have your actual approved unit rate, your grant award amount, the, list of subgrantees or branches with their unit rate and the number of units that they agree to complete, their sub-award amount, the total sub-award amount, and the amount that was agreed upon for cost of managing a network. So you'll get an email from your HUD POC, the 1044, and that attachment, and they will tell you that your rate has been approved and that you should review these documents very, very closely to make sure everything looks correct. And then to sign, and once that's signed, then the grant will be executed. Rebecca Mullally, is there anything that you want to jump in on that you think we could touch on while I catch up with what's going on in the question box?
Yes, I think the big one is that we've gotten a couple questions asking about the status of unit rate approvals. So I can speak on that, several, we have a mixed bag where there are grantees who have had their final rates approved and have received their statement of work attachment from HUD, from their HUD point of contact. But there are others that are still in the process of being finalized and reviewed. And once that has occurred, you will receive a final statement of work attachment with your final rate via your HUD POC.
New responses are shown in part, but many are cut off. One reads, all the data to collect. One reads, understanding the home purchase and mortgage origination templates acceptable responses.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing Rosalind, your question about does there need to be documentation of both home purchase and mortgage origination in the file? And the grant agreement in that section that I referenced, the title of the subsection is documentation of unit component completion. It says evidence of home purchase or mortgage origination, or. Sorry, or, not and or, just or. I see a question that came in recently, the bottom of the list. If a client has been already billed to a CHC grant within the period of performance for pre-purchase counseling, is this client eligible as a homeownership initiative unit if post-purchase counseling is completed and the purchase docs are acquired? No, you have to make sure that there's no double billing between the two HUD grants, between comprehensive and homeownership initiative. Rosalind, you had a really good question about PII earlier during the presentation. Our original intent in that, in those data points that we have for collecting for a unit was to absolutely not have PII. But we want to go back and look at that, analyze it more. And so we'll follow up with you to answer that. And then Abby, I see your question about post-purchase counseling. Your credit score at the end of counseling. Some pre-purchase clients, when they're getting pre-purchase counseling, they do improve their credit score as part of the process. And in those cases, those grantees should have both pre and post credit score info. some, some clients might not need to improve their credit. So in those cases, the credit would remain the same. We understand though that there's a timing issue with this, right? That usually the post-purchase and then getting that credit score takes some time. And we are in we've got time limits here with the period of performance and post-purchase counseling. And so I think, to everyone here, if your client has come back for post-purchase counseling, then we would want that, and we would want to see that credit score that occurred when they came back and you provided post-purchase counseling. So that could be collected. However, if they don't come back for post-purchase counseling, you've got that certification sign that they said they were going to come back. You tried as you could, right, to get them to come back through the door. But you can still bill for that client if you followed our rules around follow-up. Then, in that field, I would just indicate an NA or something like that, notifying us that wasn't collected.
New responses say, extension of performance period, on units, help with description of method and formulas the contractors are asking for, calculating proposed units, and support for cost basis.
I see something that was asking for training on calculating proposed units. I think it was down a little bit. Yeah. I think that's a really good question too. What we're looking for with that question is since this is the first year of the grant, is really being able to use your 9902 data and being thoughtful about how you would be, categorizing the clients that you work with for this grant versus your comprehensive, to be able to, intentionally split out and figure out like how many realistically you think you could get that would complete all three components of the unit to be able to bill for this grant versus, the needs and the general needs of your clients that you usually see, do more of them look like that they need a longer time for pre-purchase, things like that. And then they could be billed right to the comprehensive grant. So it's a hard question to answer, but again, I think that's something that we can talk through. It would be useful after this year to be able to see how that panned out, right? With being able to calculate it on the front end to the reality of what happened by the end of the period of performance, being able to come up with some best practices for calculating unit rates once we've gotten a year under our belt with this grant. I see someone is saying that they would like need resources on an extension of the period of performance. The extensions are, the process is listed in the grant agreement, I think in Article 3. So please refer to that if you need help with figuring out the extension process.
A cursor moves to the referenced responses, highlighting them in blue.
Rebecca, is there anything else that you think we could answer offhand now, or should we follow up with folks that we haven't answered after this training?
Yeah, I think the only remaining ones are better. We might need to group and respond via email.
Right. Okay, and I see that the person who asked the first question still on our list is an anonymous attendee. If we do not have one or two data elements on a case, can we still build a HUD? You can drop us a chat with your email information if you'd like, so that we can respond to you, because we can't see who you are from your question. And in the chat, you could always just drop that. If you don't want to send it to everyone, you can switch who you're sending the message to in the to drop down, where you could see me, or you could send it to hosts and panelists, and then we could all see it. Okay, well, thank you all. Again, this is being recorded, so you should be able to see this on the HUD Exchange. within the next, I believe, 7 to 10 days. It will be up.
Text: Thank you for joining us. Disclaimer: This material is based upon work supported, in whole or in part, by Federal Award Number C23TVA0011 awarded to IF by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The substance and findings of the work are dedicated to the public. Neither the United States government, nor any of its employees, makes any warranty, express or implied, or assumes any legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any information, apparatus, product, or process disclosed or represents that its use would not infringe privately owned rights. Reference herein to any individuals, agencies, companies, products, process, services, service by trade name, trademark, manufacturer, or otherwise does not constitute or imply an endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the authors, contributors, the U.S. government or any agency thereof. Opinions contained herein are those of the authors, and do not necessarily reflect the official position of, or a position that is endorsed by, HUD or any federal agency.
You will also find now the slides for this presentation, along with what I was speaking about at length before, the grant activity report template. That should be up there too. It's an Excel file, so you can use that if you'd like to. If you have any questions lingering after this, you can email housing.counseling@hud.gov, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining us and for your questions, and for the team at Office of Policy and Grant Administration at HUD for delivering today's webinar. That will conclude our webinar for today. You are free to sign off. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
The slide is replaced by the text: Lindsay Burns, ICF.